Have you been there? Your car breaks down on the side of the road, you get an unexpected doctor bill in the mail, or it's raining and your roof starts leaking. Do you have a plan for those unexpected expenses when they come up? Life happens, and I don't want you to go into debt when it does. So in this video, I will be discussing one of the most important aspects of wise money management, and that is having an emergency fund. We will discuss what it is, why you need one, and how to get started saving one quickly today. This is the next video in our money management series. I've linked that playlist in the description down below. And if this sounds like something that would be helpful to you, I'd greatly appreciate a subscribe to the channel. So let's talk about emergency funds. I thought that this recent survey was pretty eye-opening as you look overall varying generations from Gen Z all the way up to baby boomers. 27% of the respondents say that they have no emergency savings. And these findings from the Federal Reserve show that 35% of Americans would not be able to handle an emergency of $400 or more. That sounds pretty stressful to me, and I don't want you to fall into that category. An emergency fund is just that. It is a savings account that you have set aside with money earmarked specifically for emergencies only. And having one is a major step in being financially healthy and just wise with your money, because it isn't a matter of if those things are going to happen, but simply when. We all know that. Life happens. An emergency fund is protection. It is self-insuring, it's a hedge for when those things that inevitably will happen do happen, so that you can avoid financial ruin, so that you can avoid additional stress on top of an already difficult situation. It also helps you if you're currently trying to pay off your debt to not go further into more debt, and if you're debt-free, to stay that way. Everybody should have some type of an emergency fund depending on their situation. So before I get started, I do want to speak to the people who will say, you know what, I don't need an emergency fund, that's what my credit card is for. I would highly discourage you from thinking of a credit card, which typically has a very high interest rate, as your emergency fund. When you get into an emergency situation, you will now compound the difficulty of whatever that situation is with the fact that you will have a bill at a very high interest rate that is now added into your life. That emergency will end up costing you even more than it would have if you could have just paid it in full. Because who needs the added stress of new bills and additional debt when we're already dealing with a difficult situation? An emergency fund also just gives you a lot of peace of mind and reduces stress when those unexpected events occur. When a tire goes flat or you have an unexpected trip to the emergency room for your kiddo. I'm a boy mom, so that's just part of life sometimes. So let's talk about what counts as an emergency. What do you actually use this emergency fund for? It's basically for the things that you didn't anticipate would happen, the really unexpected things, like a medical event or a job loss. There's a storm and a tree falls on your roof and now you have a house repair, or maybe a really big car repair that came out of the blue. What isn't an emergency? Well, that's all the things that you knew were coming and you could save up for. So Christmas, not an emergency, it's the same day every year. A vacation, some clothes that you really wanted, even things like a car repair that you knew would be coming, like regular maintenance, or your car's been making a weird noise for the last few months. Maybe a medical procedure that you have done every year that you knew you would need in 6 months. These are the types of things that you would be saving up for, and they wouldn't really qualify as an emergency. But personal finance is very personal, so you kind of get to decide what can come from the emergency fund and what couldn't. For example, if you know you're going to need to replace your car, ideally you would want to save up some money to buy another car. But sometimes that happens faster than you realize. You didn't have enough time to save. So a portion or even all of that may have to come out of your emergency fund if it is an emergency because you need a car. So the most important thing here isn't what I say is an emergency or what anybody else says. It's you have to have a distinction that you stick to. So you have to know, what does that money earmarked for the emergency actually go towards, and what are things that we will not touch that money for, and you just have to know that and stick to it in order to make this emergency fund not just a random savings account that you use for whatever. All right, let's talk about how much money you should have in your emergency fund. And again, there isn't like a right or wrong answer here. It is very personal to you and your circumstances. If you are a one-income family with 7 children, you're gonna have a different emergency fund amount than if you're just a single person living on their own. The conventional wisdom about emergency funds is that you want about 3 to 6 months of your expenses tucked away. Now, when I say expenses, I don't mean all of the extras. I'm talking bare bones, just to get by expenses. So the way that I like to think of this is, if you lose your job, what do you still need to pay? It's really a needs versus wants. So you're going to want a roof over your head. You're going to need to eat, although you may be able to cut back depending on what you spend on food. You may be able to cut that back a bit. You're going to need to put gas in your car if you need to go look for another job, possibly keep your cell phone working so that jobs can contact you, internet, certain things that you would definitely need. And then you kind of cut out all of the extras, the things that can be cut in an emergency situation. And that's a good way to gauge what is a month of expenses. And then you would want to save up between 3 and 6 months of whatever that bare bones budget tells you to do. If you're not making a budget, I made a video about that, and I will link that down below as well. It might help you figure out a good budgeting method that would work for you, because you're not going to know what your expenses are in order to have a goal for your emergency fund if you don't have some sort of a budget or money plan so that you can see income, expenses, and all of that information. Another factor that determines if you should do 3 months or 6 months or somewhere in between is just your personal situation, your skill set. If you have a job or a skill set that you can easily replace, you know you could get hired doing something else, even if it's not your dream job, pretty quickly, you probably don't have to save up as much as somebody who has maybe a more specialized, harder to find type of skill set, or a seasonal job where you know there's going to be months out of the year where you just don't have work. Do you have a chronic health issue that requires frequent medical visits and costs in that way? You may want to save up a bigger emergency fund. Do you drive older cars, or maybe you live in an older house that you know is going to have frequent things going wrong with it? It's always good to look at your life situations and sort of decide from that what you feel comfortable having as that emergency fund. I would say minimum 3 months, and then kind of go from there. Personally, for our family, we have always gone with a 6-month bare bones budget emergency fund. Because we're a one-income family, we just felt more comfortable knowing that we had enough money there if my husband was out of work for a time, or we just had a bigger house repair, something like that come up with our kids. 6 months for us just made us feel better. But again, that's very personal. So find what works best for you. The whole goal is that you have some sort of emergency fund in place to prevent you from going into debt. So where should you keep this emergency fund as you're building it and once you have it? Your emergency fund needs to be accessible. So you don't want it in an account that you can't get to readily, or where you'll have to pay any penalties or fees to access your funds. If you like to use a credit card but pay it off every month, then you could use the credit card potentially to cover the emergency, but you need to know that you could get to the funds so that you could pay it off before the month comes due, before there's any interest. I recommend currently a high yield savings account for your emergency fund. That's what we do. We actually use an online bank called Ally. They have no fees and they offer a pretty good competitive interest rate. Now, in the last few years, the market has had some interest rate issues and we've had some rate increases because of inflation. So it's been kind of nice to have that higher interest rate. But even in years when the interest rates were low, an online bank like Ally, and there's a lot of competitors that you could look at too, they offer more than your typical bank or credit union would offer to have it in their savings account. So I highly recommend the highest yield savings account that you can get, because why not get a little boost for that money as it's sitting there? As I continue to research our DIY investing, I am going to be looking into some other options for maybe a portion of our emergency fund, possibly a brokerage account. So stay tuned if you're interested. Maybe give us a subscribe, because I will be talking a lot about brand new investing by yourself, not needing to pay an advisor to invest. You can do it yourself, and I'm going to be sharing a lot more about that here on the channel. So how can you get this emergency fund saved up, and how can you do it fast? Well, the first thing you want to do before you beef up your emergency fund is definitely pay off high interest debt. In fact, I would recommend you focus on paying off any debt that isn't a mortgage. Hopefully in the process of doing that, you have freed up money that you've been throwing at that debt, and now you can just treat that emergency fund almost like another bill, except instead of the interest hurting you like it was with the debt, it's actually helping you. Any money that you can find in your budget to pay off debt or otherwise, anything that you can slice and scrimp and save, take that and throw it into that emergency fund. You will be surprised how quickly that will build up, and also how motivated you'll be when you know now that money isn't going out to your creditors, it's going to yourself. It's so much more fun to be giving the money to yourself every month than to the people that you owed. And if you've paid off your debt or you're close, you're doing the hardest part. Now is when it gets fun. You can take that money and you're saving it for your own purposes, to serve your financial goals and to protect you and your family from unexpected events. Anytime you get any lump sum of money, maybe it's a gift or a tax return or a bonus at work, anything that you can get, take it and toss it into that emergency fund until you hit that number that you've decided is the smart, the wise number for you, for your family to have to hedge against emergencies. You might want to pick up a part-time job, get a side hustle, have a yard sale, sell some stuff, whatever you can do to, as quickly as possible, get that cushion in place, because that's when starting to do stuff with your money gets especially fun. And if you're tucking that away into a high yield savings account, then you're actually getting a little boost every month, which is just passive money that you're earning there in that account. And it's just so much more fun when interest works for you rather than against you. Building up your emergency fund is a really exciting part of your money management journey. Click into this playlist to see all of our money management series, and I will see you over there.